On April 11, 1947, the SS Grand Camp docked in the Texas shipping port of Texas City. Most Americans at that time couldn't point out Texas City on a map, but every newspaper in the country would tell of its horrors 6 days later. It was the deadliest industrial disaster in American history. The 2 days of horror showed a nation that sometimes progress can come at a great cost.
America, industrial miracle of the century. From all the states flow bounteously the products of forest, mine, and field. From her workshops pour all the needs of modern living. By air, land, and water, these treasures of enterprise are sent out to every point of the compass. No job is too big for American industry.
In the years after World War II, Texas City was a center of industry. It was one of the keys to America winning the war and beating the Axis powers. Texas City was the perfect location to refine the blood of America's war machine. Thousands of workers toiled away in refineries, making the precious resources the world desperately demanded.
This town had a lot to be proud of. We had all these plants. They were working 24/7 to make products to help our boys in the war. The ladies stepped up. They formed the Red Cross. They were wrapping bandages. I mean, everybody in this town was participating. And it was a form of patriotism that you don't see when nothing serious is going on. People aren't that patriotic. But when your country or your town is under a crisis, people come together and they are proud of where they're from and who they are. And that's what happened to us.
During the 1940s, chemical and petroleum industries in Texas City grew tremendously. The city's population more than doubled in the years preceding the Second World War.
It was actually founded as an industrial city. The founders saw the potential for the port, and that was why they chose to buy land here and develop it. Not that war is ever a good thing, but it is good for business if you are in the industrial sector. And then World War II came, and so again, another large industrial boom.
And the American doughboy wants trucks. He wants assault boats, barbed wire, pillboxes. And the American doughboy wants guns, big guns, mortars, bazookas that can splinter an enemy tank. He wants rifles, carbines, automatics, Tommy guns.
The Nazis occupy 2/3 of France. Their policy basically is that the German civilians should have more to eat than any of the occupied countries. From 42 on, there was sort of constant bombing that was going on by the Americans, hitting strategic points, train depots, rail lines, bridges.
And in the skies, bombers and fighters maintain cover for the ground forces below.
The most traumatic period for the French citizens was prior to the landing, because the Americans bombed very, very heavily in preparation for the landing, and basically quite a number of cities along the coast were more or less wiped out. Part of the thing was they knew it was going to be really tough to do the landing. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, land invasion of that kind ever in all of history. It was just an incredible amount of planning that happened.
Entering the final phase of victory over Hitler's Nazis, Yank armies swarm across Western Germany, bringing devastation to cities of the Reich. From all sides, Allied might crushes in on the remains of the Wehrmacht, bringing home the horrors of war to the German people as they have never experienced it before. But German morale breaks down and unruly crowds loot wrecked stores.
After the Allied victory in April 1945, Europe was in shambles. Beating the Nazis had come with the price of forcing millions to the brink of starvation. Now, America wanted to rebuild the countries it destroyed. To solve this problem, the country turned to scientific innovation.
And so, after thousands of years of man's dependence upon products in their natural state, we find today our men of science drawing from these same basic well-known materials the parts and elements, the separate compounds needed to create new things, new articles, better suited to our modern needs.
The farmer is on the march, and at his side march his services of supply. The scientists, the teachers, the chemists, industry and enterprise producing for the farmer better implements, better fertilizers, better insecticides and fungicides, better materials of all kinds for better farms and greater outputs.
They say food's needed as much as bullets. Well, maybe a couple of extra bushels of these will help us get back to peaceful living again. And the quicker, the better.
America looked to ammonium nitrate, a potent artificial fertilizer, to feed the millions of starving Europeans who faced a food crisis after the war.
Industry needs nitrogen. Farmers need nitrogen in fertilizers to renew the soil. And so here, nitrogen from the air and hydrogen from water are combined to produce ammonia. This chemical union is one of the real advances of science.
Ironically, the same life-giving properties that make ammonium nitrate a fertilizer can be used for devastating explosives. Ammonium nitrate is one of the principal components of TNT.
But still, chemistry marches on. Chemical products of equal importance to the familiar things we buy daily are the heavy chemicals which to most of us are merely names. Yet they serve too in almost every field of industry. Their jobs to make our lives healthier, happier, and more complete. Nearly everything you use has been either created or improved by chemistry. And for the future, through the efforts of chemists, explorers in this new field will come new and even more remarkable developments. Products which will affect our lives and continue better living through chemistry.
The 7,100-ton Grand Camp began its journey from its home port in France, then crisscrossed the Atlantic to pick up cargo in Venezuela and then to Cuba, then made its way to the Houston Ship Channel, where port authorities forbid the transportation of ammonium nitrate. It was declared unsafe for transport a few months earlier. There were a few hesitations about shipping ammonium nitrate at that time, especially in Texas City, as it was thought to be stable when mixed with clay. On the morning of April 16th, over 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate were loaded inside the ship's hull. At 8 a.m., longshoremen carried the remaining 100-pound paper sacks from train cars, then brought them below the deck of the Grand Camp. As they did, many noticed the bags feeling unusually warm. As workers entered the ship's hold that morning, they smelled smoke in the air. Smoke began to fill the cargo area, and workers frantically moved bags to locate the fire. Flames quickly spread as workers doused the burning bags with water jugs and fire extinguishers. At 8:25 a.m., the railway terminal raised its fire siren, alerting the local volunteer fire department. As the fire spread aboard the Grand Camp, a yellow-orange smoke cloud billowed in the sky. Hundreds of spectators gathered along the shore and pier to find out what was happening before them.
I was just a kid. I wasn't even in school yet. And I remember my aunt taking me by my hand and running. And I remember turning back and looking at the smoke. It was so beautiful. It was black and orange, and it was just really pretty.
The ship's captain, Charles de Guibon, ordered the hatches on the hold closed, and steam was pumped inside in an attempt to squash the flames. However, the steam liquefied the ammonium nitrate and increased the amount of oxygen fueling the fire. The combination of steam and the fire's heat slowly built in intensity like a teapot. The temperature quickly rose to the 850 degrees needed to detonate the ammonium nitrate. At 9:12 a.m., the cargo detonated in one of the largest non-nuclear blasts in human history. The force of the blast immediately leveled over 1,000 buildings. Death estimates ranged over 580 people, and thousands more were severely injured. Witnesses compared the devastation to the recent atomic bombing of Nagasaki.
I was walking to school, and I came up to the corner of 3rd and Dock Road, which is a half a block from where the ship was. And then I heard this loud noise, shaking of the ground, and I cried out to this Heavenly Father that I didn't even have on my agenda, because what I had on my agenda was education, and I love school, I still do, I cried out and I said, save. And before I could save me, I call it a thing, I don't know what it was, but it was a huge piece of the ship. As everything was rattling and the first explosion went off, it covered me. It covered me, and when I found myself under that thing, I was on my knees. I could breathe under there. I said, well, I can dig out of here. I said, I won't have no trouble getting out of here. And then there was another movement in the piece of the ship, but it was a big one. It blew off, and when I stood up, I found that everybody around me was dead except me.
Refineries owned by Monsanto and Union Carbide burst into flames by supersonic shrapnel sent from the explosion. The blasts registered on seismographs as far away as Denver, Colorado, and a 15-foot wave traveled 100 miles down the Texas coast. News of the first explosion in Texas City raced quickly across the country. Journalists from across the region descended south from Houston. Several branches of the United States military sent personnel to form a blockade around the town, while rescue workers attempted to put out the hellish inferno. Crews aboard another ship, the High Flyer, desperately raced to steer the ship out of port, but the ship's anchor was caught among debris. After drifting close to incinerated wreckage of the Grand Camp, the High Flyer's cargo of ammonium nitrate caused the second explosion, 15 hours later. 2 more responding firefighters lost their lives trying to stop the flames. Ben Kaplan, a reporter at KTHT, witnessed the second explosion.
Here comes another explosion. The sky. You have just heard it. We are bending down. The sky is like broad daylight. No one knows what it is from where we are. We have all hit the ground. We are all lying on the ground. It may have been another barge that went up. The sky is still red. We are all hitting the dirt. I hope you can hear me. This is Kaplan, your KTHT News Director, with the entire KTHT News staff lying down. Folks are running in the street.
All told, 27 of the 28 volunteer firefighters of Texas City gave their lives in the disaster.
I got off what they call graveyard that morning. I went down to the Texas Avenue and checked was passing. I looked, none of those people was laying in the back of the truck. So I hurried home. She was all right. It was just a box, you know. He was kneeling down on concrete, putting a saw on, and was kind of paralyzed. He wants to holler. I still about that time. His wife drove up. I opened the door. We'll get him inside. You take off north.
The Red Cross organized a massive search effort with city and state officials to find survivors trapped in the rubble. Rescue workers continued to pull bodies out around the clock, so much that the school gymnasium served as a makeshift morgue. Often, though, there wasn't anything to be found but scraps of clothing or an empty shoe. The blasts vaporized many souls in an instant.
My uncle come down when the explosion happened and my grandfather was killed in it. He come down to help and he found this piece and he left it with me years ago, so I've been hanging on to it. He was in the plant when it went. He was working construction in there. A week after the funeral, they called my grandmother, want to know where they're going to bury her husband. And that they accidentally had the wrong body. So they had to do it again. But really, you probably couldn't recognize him real good, but they recognized him, I guess, a week later or whatever. Anyway, I had to have another funeral.
The city's mechanic garage served as a temporary embalming room. Even students from local dental schools were commissioned to identify remains.
There was a big dish there, and I heard this noise, and it was a friend of mine that was also going to school at that time, and she had a piece of steel in her stomach that went through her stomach, and then another one through her leg. And she says, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. I said, no, you're not, I'm gonna pick you up. And I picked her up, and I was carrying her at this ambulance, and the ambulance driver was Jack Rowe, who was also a student, and I knew him, and he knew me, and he says, Ernie, get in the ambulance. And I said, no, take my friend, look at her. She's got this piece of steel in her stomach, and she looked like she was pregnant. And all of a sudden, and we were so skinny because we played a lot of sports, you know, so he says, take my friend. So he did take her and put her in the back, and he says, you get in the front with me. I said, no, I have to find my parents. I don't know where they are. And I said, look, we can't see. The smoke was so dark, we couldn't see. I said, I have to find my parents. And he says, no, you get in this ambulance. So he put me in. We were the first ambulance out of here. He said, look at your leg. When I looked at my leg, I could not take another step. The side of my leg was all bruised. All you could see was a bone, and everything was flapping. And it's through the grace of God that I walked with my friend that far. And I was in the hospital 13 months. And they said I would never walk. They had to amputate my leg. I had gangrene in it. But the reason they didn't cut it was because I was a minor and they couldn't find my parents. And I said, no, don't cut my leg, cut right here, because, you know, at 17 and you see nothing ahead of you, all your dreams gone. But anyway, I was there 13 months, and then one day the doctor says, we're going to let you go home, and you'll be back Monday. They let me out of the hospital, and I never went back.
After surviving the Battle of the Bulge in 1945, and a German V-2 rocket wounding him in battle, Curtis Trahan was no stranger to conflict. Trahan was elected mayor less than a year before the disaster in 1946. The job of Texas City mayor was seen as a steady position, a job that complemented his calm demeanor.
He knew immediately who to call, what to do. He put a second in command, Mr. Hill, and he said, for one thing, they called the Highway Patrol, they called the Texas Rangers. They came in immediately. They put a ring around the city. There was one ring of local police, there was one ring of Texas Rangers, there was a ring of Highway Patrol. They stopped anybody from coming in. They said, I know there's going to be people that just want to see the tragedy. We're not having that. If you don't have a driver's license that you live there or some other identification, you're not getting into the town. And then the Army came in and they said, we're here, we'll go immediately to martial law and take care of everything. And he said, no, we have it under control. They were being very calm as they could be with such a scope of a tragedy. And they did not allow martial law. They said, we are going to handle it. Our people are handling it. They're stepping up. And all the other plants came to the aid of Monsanto, and they sent their fire departments over, and they said, we will handle this together. And they came together as a town, and they handled it.
Trahan organized the Texas City relief effort, raising millions from across the country. Hollywood stars like Frank Sinatra and Ann Sheridan were flown in to help raise money and rebuild Texas City. Immediately following the disaster, Congress commissioned an official investigation into the Texas City disaster to find out who and what were responsible for the blasts. The federal report concluded that government failed at many levels, mainly the danger of shipping ammonium nitrate and its improper labeling.
Well, I happened to be at home because I had the chicken pox, so I wasn't over at 2nd Avenue or 5th Avenue and 2nd Street, or I would have been closer to it. And my brother happened to be home because he had the mumps. So we had gone up, we had a 2-story house, and he and I were upstairs looking out the window at the big black smoke. And our minister, who was new in town, had come over and was visiting with my mother downstairs when the first explosion went off. And he was very scared and was running out to try to get home to his family on that. And then I can't remember if my father came home. I'm sure he had to stay out at the plant. But then we went over to my grandmother's, we lived on 10th Avenue in the 800 block, and she lived in the 400 block of 12th Avenue. So we went over there, and they couldn't get hold of my grandfather because he worked down at the docks at Terminal Railroad, and So I had an older cousin who was going to look after we younger cousins and my great-grandmother, and they went out looking for my grandfather, but they never found him. He had gone out to see what the fire was, and the explosion happened and never found him at all. So that was rather traumatic. Even as a 5-year-old, I remember always praying, you know, please bring Pappy back. Let us find where he is. So he was just one of the unknown that was missing.
In 1950, survivors of Texas City filed the nation's first class action lawsuit against the federal government for negligence. After winning their initial lawsuit, the survivors' case was overturned by the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Many who lost loved ones and were left homeless chose to pick up the pieces and rebuild.
The thing that stands out to me the most is how everybody came together. The people came together. Up until that time, you know, there was segregation. They pulled together on that day like a team. When other towns were having trouble with integration, it didn't happen here. They were already bonded. I mean, that day bonded the people. Like catastrophes or tragedies will do, the best in people come out and you go forward from that.
Although no one knows what started the catastrophic disaster of Texas City, its impact ripples through time and demands to be remembered. Many who are there still choose to never forget.